we're having basically a massacre every single day. It's just becoming normalized. And I don't know why it popped in my mind, but I thought of the Boston massacre here in the United States at the beginning of the Revolutionary War and how that hardened everybody against the British. I mean, what, 5 people were killed by the British during that massacre, and it caused their blood to boil. And then here, it's just every day, 100 people, 50 of them kids, just while they're lining up to get food. It's just happening every day, day of day. Right. You think like what happened in Boston back in the day for us was enough to get that revolutionary spirit going. Right. Think about what this is doing, for the people around the world, getting this revolutionary spirit that this has to stop. But it keeps on going on, and it seems like Trump just can't have it, can't tell Netanyahu to stop. But he's pushing some plan for a 60-day ceasefire that Israel's totally on board with. And he's saying Hamas has to take this deal. Can you tell us what that deal is?
Yeah, the last I heard is that Israel had agreed to it, and then it was the ball was in Hamas's court. But at the same time, I've heard that, the IDF is in favor of this, but Netanyahu isn't. He really doesn't want a ceasefire. He wants to go ahead with the operations and the ethnic cleansing. So, beyond that, it seems like more of the same. We've heard these things before. We hear these very optimistic statements from Trump. Usually nothing comes of those statements. So I don't know. We could have a ceasefire. I mean, again, Hamas is in a desperate situation, and the Gazan people are, and they just may agree to one. And there is pressure within Israel that continues, and a majority of Israelis really do want to see a ceasefire and want the hostages to come home. It's Netanyahu and his, far right coalition members that just want to continue. So we'll see. There could be a ceasefire, but I wouldn't bet on it. Again, it just may be that, Hamas, for its own reasons, it understands that this is a ceasefire that will be violated by the Israelis. They saw what happened in the last one. They need to have some kind of guarantee. I don't know even know how they can get it. Because the thing is, if they return all the hostages, the last of them, and I think they maybe have like from 25, something like that, or living hostages, then they don't have any bargaining chips left. Those are their bargaining chips. And so they need to get some sort of real, solid guarantee that the ceasefire will lead to actual peace and be supported by the U.S. But again, how can they actually get a guarantee that they can believe in? I don't know. So that's on, Hamas's side. And then again, we have these people on the Israeli side who really don't want to see a ceasefire. They just see it as an interruption of their ethnic cleansing campaign. But they may have to, but there's a lot of pressure within Israel, both from the IDF and then from the general population, to make some kind of deal.
Yeah, I mean, I know Hamas doesn't have really any cards to play, but just seeing what happened in Iran during these negotiations and the sneak attack, and then also just the first ceasefire originally with Gaza and Israel as well, how it was broken. It just seems like Hamas has to know that any agreement that they make with Israel and the United States is ultimately going to be a trap of some sort, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the history. And it's just every ceasefire that it seems that Israel has ever agreed to is subsequently violated by them, often on a massive scale. Certainly true in Lebanon that the violations are ongoing, and it was true of the last Gaza ceasefire. The Israelis just didn't abide by it, and they slowed down their operations. They didn't kill nearly as much, but they hardly, they didn't deliver on their promises, or very, very few of them.
Do we see any glimmers of hope for the people of Gaza, the Palestinians? I mean, just there seems to be increasing awareness and the public speaking out against it.
Right.
Is there any?
Yeah, I really don't think so. I'm just sorry to say that. I just don't see hope. They have been. Gaza was a very densely populated place to begin with, By some measures, it was the most densely populated territory, however you want to define that, in the world. And they have been they have been driven from approximately 80% of their land, or 82% now of Gaza is a militarized zone. With places in those militarized zones, the Gazan citizens are not supposed to, they're simply not supposed to enter those zones. So 18% of Gaza is still technically safe. And what we've learned from the past is so-called safe zones aren't really safe. Tent cities get bombed and so forth. So they've been squeezed into an ever-shrinking piece of land, and they're being starved. Their food's coming, but it's just so sparse, and it's really so far below, what they really need, that malnutrition is rampant. People are dying. We really just don't know how many people are dying. We get some sense of how many people are killed directly by the IDF, but we don't know how many people are dying just because of the lack of medical facilities and because of malnutrition and so on and so forth. I know this is just an anecdote, but I think it does illustrate, the kind of situation that they're in and how many people do end up dying in Gaza. I was just reading about a man who was spent, days down in southern Gaza trying to get some food at one of these food distribution centers, that's run by this private foundation, clearly controlled by Israel, probably funded by the Mossad. And he never actually got the food, but he ended up being shot, on his last attempt, and he got a bullet in his buttocks, and he was able to return home. But then as the days, the next day or the day after, he began to show signs of some sort of infection. He began to, well, actually, I skipped a very important part of it. I mean, first he went to a hospital, and they told him, "Sorry, we can't help you." And basically, the reason is if your leg hasn't been blown off, or your arm hasn't been blown off, you're just we don't have the time for you, because they have to just they have to focus their resources on those people who are in the greatest need, and they just don't have the resources to treat every injury. So he went home, and then, he began to develop these symptoms, went back, and they said, okay, we'll operate. But they didn't have the proper equipment. For example, they didn't have CAT scan machines, or they only had one for the whole hospital, and that was just reserved again for the high priority cases. So they didn't even really know exactly where the bullet was, and they just didn't have all the necessary equipment to perform the surgery properly. Normally, this would have been an easy surgery to perform. It would have been with a very high rate of success. But, okay, they did get the bullet out of him, but then he died like 2 days later. And then this is, okay, his brother is telling the story, and he said, and then back at home, their father is getting sicker and sicker. Has a heart condition, but he no longer can get heart medicine. And he's going to, so, they're worried about him. They may lose him too. And that's just take that one. This is a story of one man talking about his brother and about his father, but just multiply that by, 1 million. And I mean, really by 1 million. And that's what's happening in Gaza. So a lot of things, there are those people that are gunned down and killed, immediately by the Israelis. And we get most of those statistics, but not nearly all of them, because again, people end up under the rubble, or they're vaporized, or they just, there's nobody to report the incident. Just the family is already, maybe the parents have been killed and it's just some kids, and they don't know to go to the hospital and report it. So there are various reasons why we don't get even the full figure for the direct deaths by the IDF. But this other one just gives you a kind of an idea of how many secondary or indirect deaths there are, from the war. And that's a huge part of what their suffering entails. And it's ongoing, and it's getting worse, with every passing day.
Yeah, this at some point in time, the Western world will have to recognize what has happened in Gaza, right? At some point, they will.
I hope so. Like we said, there is glimmers of recognition. I think in some cases they're sincere. I think it is at least partially sincere. For example, in the case of Pierce Morgan, but these statements that come from Mertz, I just don't think these people really care. They just understood that they need to say something because Israel's making them look bad, but they continue to support Israel. With really without conditions. Nothing's changed on that point. I, like you say, I would think so. It's just that we've gone so far already and nothing has really changed that it just makes me wonder maybe the Israelis can go all the way and still nothing will change. I mean, before this began, I didn't think that, that could be possible, but I didn't think it was possible that we could go so far and we can still have solid support from Western governments.
Right. I think it's disgusting and shocking to so much of the world to see how the Western governments have been so complicit in this. And then, part of me wonders like, okay, is it because Mossad's got dirt on everybody or they feel threatened? Or is part of it actually just self-preservation that they weren't really paying attention so much in the beginning? We'll just do whatever the United States says. We always say Israel's great, blah, blah, blah. And now it's gotten to this point where like, wait, what, forced starvation? I don't like that. I can't ignore it. But as a political leader of the West during this time, you will be going down in history as one of these evil men that did not stand up to this genocide. And so you're like, I can't be complicit in this. The only way forward is if we stop now, then my crimes will be exposed. So maybe we have to be victorious on this and we have to put more support behind Israel. I'm just trying to think,
Yeah.
rationalize how these guys can justify what's going
Yeah.
on.
Well, yeah, I don't think these people have any kind of moral compass whatsoever. I'm unfortunately, most of these people that rise to the top in Western countries, that they're just kind of, again, I describe them as empty suits, just tools of the various deep states, or they just know what they're supposed to do and that's what they do. That's what brought them to the top. They never really exercise their conscience, and I think their consciences maybe don't really exist. They just they worry when they begin to look bad though. And so, but the response is not to actually change course, but to wring their hands in public a little bit, and they think that'll be a solution to the problem. I just have, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these leaders, they're narcissistic, right? I mean, they care about their legacy. They want to be on the right side of history, right? Surely there's got to be a point where they have to realize that, okay, I'm going to be on the wrong side of of history on this. And I guess the calculation that some might make is that, all right, I'll stay. Right, we can turn this road ship around if we just wipe out all the Palestinians and then we don't ever talk about it again, and it'll just be the history's written by the victors. Maybe there's
Yeah.
something in that, but
Yeah.
surely we got to have more and more people thinking like, history's not going to look kindly upon the people that were complicit in this, supported it, had some power to speak out against it, and didn't do it.
Yeah. Well, that's possible. Maybe if it becomes very clear, and the public pressure continues to grow, at some point, these people, for self-interested reasons, will flip in a meaningful way. That's certainly possible. It seems like a lot of them, when you talk about history, is for them, their history is they're always living in 1939, right? and to to show that you're a moral person, you have to stand on side of the victims, who are the Jews. And now, yeah, okay, they were victims back in 1939, but they're not the victims now. It's just that you say, okay, you're very brave in your 1939 world, but in the world that exists now, you're on the wrong side. It just seems like they haven't woken up. Their morality is based on events that took place a long time ago and a certain interpretation of those events, but it's not based on the current reality, and that's not uh, and so it has caused them to actually, as you say, put themselves on the wrong side of history as it is being lived out before our eyes now.
Right. Yeah, everybody invoking World War II and doing these Hitler and Winston Churchill comparisons constantly. The recent events have kind of ruined World War II for me. You
Hmm.
know how I was, as a little kid, I was obsessed with World War II. I think you remember
Mm.
all these books I have, and it was just, and now it's just, World War II has been tainted. This great story, the good fight, the narrative that was always put about the bad guys and how he stopped, Hitler. The whole history of the West. I, and I think this is kind of what I'm getting at a bit, is that I think what we're doing in our complicity in Gaza, I think is destroying everything about the Western world. Is that maybe
Yeah, well,
a
I
bit
think it's certain.
hyperbolic? I mean,
I think it is. I mean, I think it really is eating away at the foundations. And again, you can see it more in the younger generation. Like in my generation, I wasn't part of, obviously part of the generation that went and fought the war, but I grew up in the shadow of it, and it did certainly shape my view of the world, and it shaped everybody's view of the world. It was the defining event of the 20th century, and so people's sense of morality and of who the victims are and all that was really kind of um, was was determined, by the the story, of World War II. And now, we are. That was 80 years ago, and we have, the most recent generations are have grown up. They're no longer in that shadow. They do hear about it, but it's distant. And what they're more aware of, especially like people in their 20s now, is what's happening in Gaza now. And that's the reality that's actually defining their sense of the world and, let's say, geopolitical morality. So it is, I think it really is changing, and it is bringing about the end um, of that kind of very unusual set of circumstances that that create people with the thinking of Keir Starmer and Mertz and Trump, for that matter. They're products of the World War II generation. Even though they, again, like me, they grew up in its shadow, and it, that's just going to be 10, 20 years from now. I don't think you're going to find leaders like that anymore. And there is a real chance that that whole legacy that has been terribly abused. I mean, it was a real war, and I think the story that we're told about it is largely true. I think it can be embellished, and it's simplified. It wasn't quite so black and white. It was more shades of gray, but all in all, it was a good fight, and I kind of I in general agree with it. But it's that story of World War II was ended up being abused, and I think people now are seeing it, and like you, they're kind of developing just almost a revulsion towards it. I don't want to hear about it anymore. You're just using it to do terrible things now.
right. So, I mean, if this story is so much part of our identity, our history, and of us, who just of our sense of morality, like you're saying, us being the good guys, the good fight. What's going to happen to the Western world when we realize that we are on the wrong side of history, that we're not the good guys? What happens? This isn't. It's different than just like a World War II, World War One, because you had an actual military defeat. You had millions of people dead, but we're seeing something different. We're seeing
Yeah.
the death of Western society via a proxy, without actual direct conflict of Western
Mm-hmm.
European nations and the United States, Canada.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to say, because the thing is, um, it is that third pillar that we talk about, the soft power. It's not just important for the way the rest of the world looks at the West, but it's important within the West. The sense of we being on the right side of history, it kind of gives legitimacy to our own governments. And if that's really eaten away and then finally collapses, then that I think that tells you that the old order, the other two pillars, the economic and the military, really can't. They've been weakened too, But even without that, the legitimacy provided by the World War II narrative, um, the whole system, the the Western system is really put in jeopardy. It's stripped of legitimacy, and all I can say is that I think it's going to without pretending to know what it's going to lead to. It's going to open up Pandora's box because it's just, again, I tend to think back to China. It's like when the Qing dynasty fell, there was nothing really to replace it. So we had this period of warlords and various kinds of movements, and nothing really worked until, well, the communists were victorious. And then, we don't have to go too far down that road. But it's just that I think we're in I know things are very, very different, but it's sort of broadly similar. It's just that there is this crisis of legitimacy, and that just opens the door to all kinds of possibilities and just all sorts of different people. They can be political entrepreneurs, of various stripes, take advantage of the vacuum, and different ideologies arise, and we'll see where we're going.